He was shaped first by hardship, by the strength of his family, and by a dream that seemed almost impossible. It was in the shadow of loss and in the spark of youthful hope that the foundation of the man we now know began to form, and it is in that shadow where his story truly starts. Before the world knew him as a legend, Paul McCartney was simply James Paul, a boy from Liverpool with an upbringing that was both loving and scarred. That mixture gave birth to a dream he never dared believe could come true. Paul entered the world on the 18th of June, 1942, at Walton Hospital in Liverpool. At that time, Britain was in the middle of World War II, and Liverpool was one of the hardest-hit cities. The German Luftwaffe had battered the city with bombs, flattening homes, destroying streets, and leaving many families displaced or dead. When his mother, Mary, gave birth to him, the sound of sirens warning of air raids often echoed across the city. His very first breaths were taken in a world filled with fear and uncertainty, and though he was too young to understand, those conditions of survival left deep marks on the McCartney family. His father, James McCartney, was a cotton salesman by day, but his heart belonged to music. He had once played the trumpet and piano in a local dance band, and though life forced him into work that kept food on the table, music never left his side. The McCartney household was simple but never silent. Music was always present, but survival came before everything. Liverpool was rebuilding itself, and families like the McCartneys had to scrape together whatever they could. Paul's childhood was shaped not by luxury but by resilience. The family lived in modest council houses and moved several times during his early years. Their homes were small and crowded, but they were also filled with warmth and love. Mary worked tirelessly as a midwife and nurse, often on long night shifts, caring for other families even while raising her own. Paul admired her greatly, seeing her as both caretaker and provider, the steady force that held them together. James, though strict at times, nurtured his sons in his own way. He valued imagination, discipline, and simple joys. Paul and his younger brother Michael grew up in a household where meals might be modest but laughter and conversation were abundant. Paul would later reflect that his father's humor and storytelling gave him a sense of creativity and wit that never left him. It was in this humble home that Paul first encountered music, not as a career or ambition, but as a natural part of everyday life. James would sit at the upright piano and play jazz songs from the 1920s, tunes that once floated out of local dance halls. Paul absorbed them quietly, like a sponge, without realizing how deeply they would influence him later. Yet, as in most childhoods, pain eventually arrived. For Paul, the greatest blow came when he was still very young. His mother, Mary, the heart of the family, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Medical care in the 1950s was far less advanced than it is today, and despite her brave fight, she passed away in 1956, when Paul was only 14 years old. Her death shattered the family. For Paul, it was not just losing a parent, it was losing the guiding light of his world. He and his brother were suddenly without the woman who had instilled in them kindness, decency, and resilience. The grief was overwhelming and left a wound that never truly healed. Decades later, Paul would still speak of his mother with awe, often recalling dreams where she appeared, guiding him through difficult times. That trauma shaped him deeply, giving him sensitivity and emotional depth that would later seep into his music and his character. Behind his charm, wit, and genius, there was always a trace of the boy who had been broken by loss. Meanwhile, Liverpool in the 40s and 50s was a difficult place to grow up. It was a city of dockworkers, tradesmen, and working-class families bound together by struggle and community spirit. The bombings had left scars everywhere, empty lots where homes once stood, buildings scarred by shrapnel, and entire families displaced. Yet Liverpool was also a city of resilience, and its people refused to be defeated. The McCartney boys grew up surrounded by a mix of Irish Catholic and Protestant families in a city buzzing with cultural influences. It was a place where hardship and humor went hand in hand, where neighbors leaned on one another to get through. Music, too, was in the air, not just from the radio but from the pubs, the churches, and the streets. Skiffle, jazz, and the early sounds of rock and roll began to filter in, shaping young imaginations. Paul, still reeling from the loss of his mother, found comfort in the piano and in writing little tunes. What started as a way to pass time slowly became a way to express feelings he could not put into words. Grief, hope, and longing found their way into melodies that only he understood at first. As he grew older, his sensitivity to music deepened. His father's encouragement to play, combined with the memory of his mother's strength, gave him a unique balance of discipline and heart. Even then, he could not have known that these small beginnings in the modest council houses of Liverpool would one day take him to stages across the world. The pain of loss, the love of family, and the spirit of a struggling but vibrant city shaped the boy who would become one of the greatest musicians in history. Though Paul McCartney's story would go on to be filled with fame, success, and global recognition, it all began with the quiet resilience of a child shaped by war, community, and heartbreak. The boy from Liverpool carried with him not just melodies but memories, the sound of his father's piano, the laughter of his brother, and the comforting presence of a mother who, though gone too soon, left him with a strength that guided him through the rest of his life. Liverpool was not just a place to grow up, it was a city that shaped Paul McCartney in ways he could never forget. The port brought in sailors from America who carried stories of faraway places and new kinds of music, jazz, blues, and skiffle drifting from imported records. Though Paul was not yet chasing a musical career, he absorbed these sounds naturally. The city was tough, demanding grit and resilience, but it was also alive with energy. From its crowded streets and close-knit communities, Paul learned humility, camaraderie, and the value of hard work. These qualities became part of him, the very qualities that later made fans around the world feel as though he was one of them. Despite his global fame, he never really left behind those terraced Liverpool streets. Away from the noise of the city, Paul was a bright, curious, and imaginative boy. He first attended Joseph Williams Junior School and later earned a place at the Liverpool Institute, a grammar school that valued discipline and academic ability. He excelled in his studies, showing a particular gift for English literature and drawing. Teachers often praised him for his ability to tell stories and paint vivid pictures with words even at a young age, a skill that followed him throughout life. Though sometimes shy, Paul had a sharp wit that made him popular with classmates. He enjoyed making people laugh, creating little jokes or skits to entertain his peers, a trait he carried with him into adulthood. At the same time, he had a thoughtful side, especially after his mother's passing. Writing and drawing became his quiet escapes, ways to process emotions too heavy to speak aloud. His father recognized his creativity and encouraged him to learn piano. Paul resisted formal lessons, preferring instead to experiment by ear. For him, music was not about rules or structure, but freedom and discovery. He taught himself chords and progressions, learning in his own way. This playful, instinctive approach shaped his entire musical career, allowing him to bend and blend genres effortlessly. By his teenage years, his personality was already clear. He was charismatic but grounded, confident yet sensitive. Friends remembered him as someone who could brighten a room with his warmth and humor but who also carried an air of seriousness beyond his years. The loss of his mother had forced him to grow quickly, giving him both depth and determination. There was something in him that felt destined for more than an ordinary life. That quiet fire within him would push him into a path that not only transformed his own life but reshaped the very meaning of modern music. In the early 1960s, destiny brought Paul together with John Lennon, George Harrison, and later Ringo Starr. The four young men formed the Beatles, a band that began as just another scrappy rock and roll group playing clubs in Hamburg and Liverpool. None of them knew they were about to ignite a revolution that would ripple across the entire world. From the very start, Paul's natural instincts for melody, arrangement, and performance stood out. On stage, he radiated charm, able to melt hearts with a smile while commanding audiences with his voice and presence. In the studio, he was a relentless perfectionist, always pushing for new ideas and higher standards. Together with John Lennon, he formed one of the greatest songwriting partnerships in history. The two of them crafted songs that captured every shade of human experience: youthful desire and Love Me Do, joy and togetherness and I Want to Hold Your Hand, heartbreak and longing in Yesterday, and healing and hope in Hey Jude. Each song seemed to speak directly to millions, reflecting both personal emotion and universal truth. George Harrison's quiet genius and Ringo Starr's steady rhythm gave the group balance, and together the four Beatles created music unlike anything the world had ever heard. As they evolved, so did their music. What started as simple rock and roll grew into works of breathtaking complexity and imagination. Albums like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and Abbey Road redefined the possibilities of popular music, blurring the line between entertainment and art. Paul's melodic instincts and openness to experimentation helped shape these records into masterpieces, accessible yet groundbreaking. The Beatles' rise was fast and overwhelming. Crowds screamed so loudly at concerts that the band could hardly hear themselves play. Beatlemania swept across the globe, a frenzy of devotion so intense that new words had to be invented just to describe it. Paul thrived in the chaos, always ready to perform, always ready with a joke or a smile. He was the charming face of the band, the one who seemed to enjoy the spotlight most naturally. Yet beneath the joy of performing, there was the burden of pressure. Fame was both a gift and a weight, and the demand to constantly innovate tested even Paul's boundless creativity. Within the group, tensions grew. Each member had his own vision of where the music should go, and living constantly under the world's microscope strained their friendships. Paul often tried to be the glue holding them together. His ambition, discipline, and refusal to settle pushed the band forward but sometimes caused friction with the others. He wanted greatness, and he demanded it from himself and those around him. These very qualities, while sometimes difficult for his bandmates, were also part of what made the Beatles unmatched in their achievements. For nearly a decade, the Beatles remained at the center of global culture, changing music, fashion, and even the way young people saw themselves. And at the center of the Beatles was Paul McCartney, writing, singing, performing, and reinventing himself with every album. Watching him on stage during those years was to see a man in perfect harmony with his calling. Whether playing bass, strumming guitar, or sitting at the piano, he radiated joy. In unspoken moments with John, exchanging glances as they sang, the creative spark was undeniable. When he stepped forward to lead a stadium of thousands in song, he made it feel like an intimate connection, as though he was singing just for you. Paul's journey from the terraced streets of Liverpool to the largest stages on earth was extraordinary, but at its core, it was the story of a boy shaped by hardship, resilience, and imagination. The lessons he learned in those early years, humility, humor, perseverance, never left him. They gave him the foundation to become not just a musician, but a cultural force whose songs continue to inspire generations. For Paul, the Beatles were never just a job or a career, they were a family. The four young men had shared music, laughter, exhaustion, arguments, and heartbreak, creating a bond that was both beautiful and difficult. When the band finally split in 1970, it marked the end of an era, not only for him but for the world. It was painful, like losing family, but at the same time it sealed his place in history. He had helped lead the greatest band ever through its most creative years, and though the breakup was bitter, the music they left behind meant the Beatles would never truly be gone. But the Beatles were not the only important partnership in Paul's life, nor the only one that ended in struggle. His personal relationships carried both love and heartbreak. His marriage to Linda Eastman in 1969 was more than a romantic union, it was a creative and personal partnership. She was at his side on stage, behind the camera, and in everyday life. Together they raised 4 children, managing to create a family life that, despite his global fame, often felt surprisingly ordinary. On their Scottish farm, they cooked meals, laughed together, and embraced causes like vegetarianism and animal rights. Linda's death from breast cancer in 1998 was devastating. For Paul, it was a cruel echo of losing his mother to the same illness decades earlier. The grief was overwhelming, but, true to his character, he carried her spirit forward in everything he did. His songs, photographs, and activism became infused with her memory, keeping her presence alive. Years later, he found love again. In 2011, he married Nancy Shevell. Their relationship is more private, quieter than his life with Linda, but no less important. Paul often says that their days are wonderfully ordinary, spent cooking, walking, watching television, or reading together. After decades of chaos and constant public attention, this kind of companionship has brought him peace in his later years. For many, reaching the age of 80 would mean stepping away from the spotlight, but for Paul, it became another chapter. In 2022, he launched the Got Back Tour, astonishing audiences with nearly 3-hour shows. His energy and stamina defied expectations, reminding fans that though time passes, his music remains timeless. Now, at 83, he is preparing to take Got Back on the road again in late 2025, with performances planned in Las Vegas, Nashville, Palm Springs, and beyond. Each concert is more than entertainment, it is living history, a chance for new generations to experience the presence of a man who helped write the soundtrack of the modern world. Paul has never allowed himself to be defined by music alone. In recent years, his creativity has spilled into photography, painting, and writing. In 2023, his exhibition Eyes of the Storm revealed photographs he had taken during the peak of Beatlemania, raw, honest images capturing the strangeness of sudden global fame. In 2024 and 2025, he followed with Rearview Mirror, featuring over 250 never-before-seen photos. Exhibited in Beverly Hills and soon to appear in Nashville, the collections earned praise for their intimacy and humanity. Critics noted that, much like his songs, Paul's photos captured fleeting emotions, joy, exhaustion, reflection, and showed that his artistic voice extends beyond music. He has also remained a shrewd businessman. With an estimated fortune exceeding $1 billion, his investments in publishing rights, real estate, and sustainable ventures ensure that his influence reaches far beyond music. Yet he has consistently used his platform for causes close to his heart. Most recently, he supported campaigns urging coffee chains to remove surcharges on plant-based milk, aligning his business influence with his lifelong commitment to vegetarianism and animal rights. How does a man at 83 continue to perform with such power, commanding stadiums filled with thousands of fans? The answer lies in his lifestyle. A vegetarian since the 70s and now largely vegan, Paul credits his diet with giving him lasting energy. He practices yoga and cycling, and even swears by yoga, exercises designed to strengthen vision. He gardens, spends time outdoors, and maintains healthy routines. Unlike many of his peers, who succumbed to excess, Paul chose moderation. That decision allowed him not only to survive the wild decades of fame but to thrive well into old age, astonishing audiences with his vitality. With the passing of John Lennon and George Harrison, only Paul and Ringo Starr remain from the Beatles. Their friendship, built on decades of triumphs, tensions, and shared memories, has become even more meaningful. In 2023, the release of Now and Then, completed using AI from an old Lennon demo, was a powerful reminder of their shared past. For Paul, it was an act of closure, a tribute to the brotherhood that had defined his youth. His bond with Ringo is not just nostalgia but survival. They are the last two witnesses of an era that changed the world, and their companionship carries the weight of history. Paul McCartney refuses to be defined by decline. At 83, he continues to create, to perform, to explore, and to inspire. His story began in hardship, grew through resilience, flourished in love and loss, and became a legend that still evolves today. He is proof that age need not be an end but can instead be a continuation of purpose, passion, and joy. Paul McCartney's life shows us that his story is not one of fading away but of constant growth and renewal. His exhibitions, world tours, activism, and devotion to family all prove that he is still very much alive in spirit and purpose. Even now, he continues to write, perform, and dream. His legacy is not only in the timeless songs that span generations but also in the example he sets, that creativity, resilience, and love can endure through everything. Watching him today can feel bittersweet. It is difficult to see someone who once seemed untouchable grow older, and it is sobering to remember that even legends are not immune to time. Yet it is also deeply inspiring to witness a man who, after so many decades of triumph and heartbreak, still chooses to create, to share, and to love. Paul McCartney is not just a figure from history. He is proof that a life lived fully never fades into silence. It keeps singing, and as long as he has breath, the music will continue. History and his millions of fans will always carry his song forward, preserving the undying legacy of a man who has shown the world that passion and perseverance can outlast time itself.